Well, hello, my beautiful reader friends, and welcome back or welcome for the first time if you are new here. My name is Lori Beth, and welcome to my little corner of the internet where we get into all of the bookish small talk. So I have to be upfront, and I have to be honest. I'm doing today's video because this is something that I have been struggling with for probably, I want to say the last 2 months. The last 2 months have been very challenging for me reading-wise, and I have felt myself slumping hard, and I don't know what happened. Like, it just came out of nowhere. And I was quickly reminded that even though I can go for weeks or months on end without ever really feeling like I'm struggling to read something or wanting to read something, boom, it can come and hit me absolutely out of nowhere every single time. So as I have been personally working through my reading slump during the last few months, I thought this would be a good time to kind of sit down and give my tips and tricks, if you will, for beating a reading slump. And I wanted to do this because, in my opinion, each time a slump happens to me, it's kind of different. Sometimes a slump can mean like I don't want to read. Like I don't want to read anything at all. Sometimes a slump can mean I really feel like reading, but nothing is landing, like nothing hits. And when either one of these cases happens, I have to personally go back to my tried and true methods of getting myself through a reading slump. So that's what we're going to talk about in today's video, my tips and tricks for getting yourself through a reading slump. And again, this is just subjective. This is what works for me, but I thought I could offer at least a few ideas for you to use yourself. If you find yourself slumping, if you feel a slump coming on, or maybe you've been in a slump for quite a while, maybe try to do one of the tips that we go over in today's video and see if it works for you. So before we get to the video today, I wanted to take a minute to thank the partner of today's video, which is Wicks Candles. Wicks is an amazing small business run by a woman named Murphy who wanted to bring her own passion for books and media to the world and almost give you an immersive experience when you are enjoying your favorite forms of media. Each candle that Murphy makes is hand poured by herself, and they represent your favorite books, TV shows, or movies, and there is something in her shop for everyone. She has everything from giant, beautiful glass candles to my personal favorite, the tin candles that you can stack throughout every room in your home. The candles themselves are absolutely stunning. The scents are to die for. And one of my favorite features is the wood wick that makes the most amazing crackle sound as they are burning in the background of your room. So check out her website, linked down below, where you can use my code LORI10 to get a discount on anything that is up for sale in the shop. And check out her Instagram and my Instagram on a weekly basis to see the candles that are being dropped every Thursday. I promise you are not going to want to miss the spring ones that are coming up. And when you pick a candle for yourself, come on back to this video and drop in a comment down below which one that you chose. Alright, so because this video is a little different than what I normally do, I decided to play with the format a little bit, and I think we're going to do this in different chapters. Each chapter is going to represent one of my tips or tricks for getting yourself through a reading slump, and then I'll just briefly share with you a book or a few books that have worked for me that went along with that tip to kind of help me get me through my own personal reading slump. So with that being said, we are going to go ahead and start with our very first chapter, which is the reread chapter. This might sound kind of obvious to some, but I think it is a tried and true way to get yourself through a reading slump. Part of the problem with slumping is that you can't find something that lands, something that hits. It's not something that is really holding your attention. And in my opinion, if you go back to a book that you know and love, it is a way to kind of reignite that spark for reading, like that passion you know that you have for stories. And this can be any book, it could be any genre, it could even be something from your childhood that you knew that you thoroughly enjoyed. I have used this tip on more than one occasion, and because of that, I actually have quite a few rereads on my bookshelves. I'll do rereads just because I feel like it sometimes, but I end up rereading a book because of situations like this. And one book that I have reread so many times in my life when I've kind of really been struggling to just feel that love again for reading is The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. And it's so funny because I talked about this book briefly in a more recent video. I can't remember which one it was, but this is a book I've had on my shelves since high school. I read it for the first time in high school. I fell absolutely in love with the setting, the story, the amazing like push and pull of the characters, jazz era party scene that these characters are involved in. And I know the way that this book makes me feel. So when I am just at my wit's end, I don't know what else to do, I will pick this book up and just crack it open and reread it. I've even picked it up and started reading a few chapters and not finished it, but it just gave me enough to kind of get the ball rolling again, if that makes sense. So this is definitely one I have read the most on my bookshelves. I'm not gonna lie, I will always have a copy of this at home. And if I'm being honest, I even have a copy on my Kindle because you never know. I mean, I could be traveling somewhere someday and just really be struggling to read, but I know I want to read something and I'll just pull that bad boy up on my Kindle and just start and get myself back into a world I know that I love so dearly. Another book that is a reread for me, and I find this one a little surprising because it is so long, but it's Babel by R.F. Kuang. This is a little bit different. It's a little more involved, much more dense than something like The Great Gatsby, where I find The Great Gatsby to be a good one because it is kind of on the shorter side, and it's a little bit more of like a glamorized love story. This hits me in a different way because I know it will suck me into a world of very complex characters and very complex politics. And sometimes I need that in a book to keep me engaged and keep me going. And again, these are all situational. And sometimes when I'm slumping and it's because something's not clicking for me, I need to reach for something I know will like make my brain actually function, like make the neurons fire in my brain and pull me into something that is just so much bigger than myself or the world that I live in. So again, if you are in the mood to read something, but nothing is really hitting you, pick something up you know that you love. Reach for a 5-star or reach for a book that just like left you breathless at the end. I swear to you, rereading a favorite is a very good way to get over a reading slump. All right, moving on to my next tip for a reading slump, short books. Again, this might seem kind of obvious, but I'm talking short. If the slump you are in is the kind where your brain just can't stay engaged, like you just can't focus on a book, don't reach for a book that is 300, 400, 500 plus pages. In my opinion, it's really hard to keep myself going if I feel like that satisfaction of reaching the end of a story is so far off. I'm already struggling to want to pick a book up and read it. What is going to keep me going when I know reading 500 pages is probably going to take me 2 weeks when I don't feel like reading? And again, this is kind of subjective because short books can mean something different to everyone. But for me personally, I consider a book short if it's like 200 pages or less. And you get to reach the end of a full story in basically no time, comparatively speaking, to some larger books. So with that being said, I do have a couple of suggestions on short books. One of them being What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher, who I have talked about time and time again on this channel. I just love this author so dearly, and more specifically, the very kind of weird and quirky stories that they write. This one specifically is a retelling of Edgar Allan Poe's The Fall of the House of Usher, so it kind of checked 2 boxes for me. I love Edgar Allan Poe to the depths of my soul. And so I personally know that I love Edgar Allan Poe's writing, so I knew this was going to be right up my alley, but also the book was well under 200 pages, and I knew I was going to get like this very unique twist on something I already enjoyed. And I'm not kidding, I couldn't put this book down, and it was mostly because it was so short. I knew that if I just kept reading a little bit more, I was getting to that end goal of finding out what happened at the end of the story. And the way that T. Kingfisher writes is also just kind of gripping on its own. She can write characters that have such funny, witty banter back and forth, but the stories, like the plot lines themselves, are also just so entertaining. So if you are looking for a fun short book to read to kind of help you get through that slump, highly recommend this one, What Moves the Dead. One of my top reads from last year. Another great suggestion for a short read is what you are looking for is in the library. Now, technically, the page count of this book is over 200, but as you can see, it's kind of short and small. So I believe the word count of the book is not that much. And this story itself is kind of more of that magical realism narrative, and it's a book about books, or a book about a library at least. A bunch of different characters find themselves at this library where a librarian kind of asks them what it is that they're looking for. They all come in with some kind of problem that they're facing in life. She gives them a list of books, and in that list of books, they end up finding the answer to whatever it is that is kind of giving them grief, or like the problem that they are trying to overcome. It was like a bunch of little mini stories within a story, which in my opinion also kind of keeps things moving along more quickly. It's like reading short chapters. And again, the book itself is not very long. So kind of getting to that ending was very quick and very easy. So this is a great read if you are looking for something short and kind of lighthearted and very easy to take in. Speaking of multiple stories within a story, another fantastic short book that I recently read was Antarctica by Claire Keegan, and it is a book of short stories. It was actually the first book I read by Claire Keegan. I keep saying this, like, was that a good idea to read that book first to experience her writing? But I absolutely loved it, so it doesn't really matter. But it is a book of short stories, and I know that doesn't land for everyone, but the way that Claire Keegan writes is so deep and emotional within such a short amount of time that I can't recommend this book enough for anybody that just likes reading short stories, more specifically for anybody that is finding themselves in that situation where they just can't keep their attention on something long and drawn out. A book of short stories is the way to go, but more specifically, Claire Keegan's beautiful writing style is one that you won't regret picking up. And from there, we have our next tip or trick, whichever you would like to call it, and that is tropes. More specifically, your favorite tropes. I kind of battled back and forth on this one because I was like, I'm going to put my favorite genres in here. That usually seems to help, but if I'm being honest, it doesn't always, because I love fantasy so much, but sometimes it's just not what I need at the moment, especially when I'm slumping. So even though typically I would just love to pick up a fantasy book, I mean, there's a lot of fantasy books that I didn't like or that I DNF'd. So that's not always the answer, is to just jump into a genre you know you love, because depending on the type of slump you are having, especially maybe if it's the kind where you don't want to read at all, maybe reverting to your favorite genre isn't the answer, but a trope that you like might be a better way to go about things, or a better way to look at things. For example, I love enemies to lovers, and enemies to lovers can be in pretty much any type of genre that you can imagine in a book. Of course, they are in a lot of fantasy stories, but they are in a lot of romance stories as well. And one of my favorite enemies to lovers stories that I have read was Love on the Brain by Ali Hazelwood. I also know that romance isn't for everyone, but Ali Hazelwood has this way of writing these very cute, fun, lighthearted, contemporary romances that bring you the most charming characters. I think this was probably the second book I read by Ali Hazelwood. It might actually be her second published book, but it sticks with me to this day. I can see the cover in my head. I loved the premise of this book. Another woman in STEM who gets to work on this project for NASA, and of course, one of the leads on this project is her mortal enemy, and she doesn't know how she's going to handle the situation. The main character, B, in this book is one of my favorite female main characters I've ever read about. Not to mention, I just liked the storyline itself. I liked reading about these people working on a project for astronauts for NASA. Like, it was kind of just very fun. And then the enemies to lovers situation that was happening just like leveled up the tension and the banter and like the environment, and like everything in the book was just like a little bit elevated, because she can write these enemies to lovers with so much tension. Like, you can feel the tension physically as you are reading these books. absolutely loved this one. Great if that is a trope that you find really enjoyable to read. Another example of a trope that I truly, truly enjoy is found family. And again, this can be in so many genres. We're talking anything from fiction to romance to fantasy, but the one that has stuck with me since the moment I closed the last page on this book is Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo, because it gave me something that I didn't actually know that was a favorite trope of mine until I read it. That's why this one really sticks out for me. And yes, this is a fantasy book, but I find this one works more for those that don't necessarily love like the super popular romantasy style books that are kind of like, the popular booktube, bookstagram, book talk books of the day. So this one is a little bit more of just like a classic fantasy, but it brings the other element of a ragtag group of people that come together to complete this heist and kind of solve a problem or like save the world that they live in. So if you find that you don't really love super romance forward fantasies, but you really like action, you like stakes, and you like to see characters develop and kind of grow into this family unit, family of sorts, this one is just one that will continue to be one of my top reads until I perish from this earth. I cannot recommend the Six of Crows duology enough. And also, we know already my very personal and very deep feelings for Leigh Bardugo. All right, so that brings us to my last and final tip for getting yourself over a reading slump. And I saved the best for last because, in my opinion, this has worked for me the most anytime I have been in a slump. And this is what I call the trial and error trick. What do you mean by that, Lori Beth? What I mean by that is that you need to trial and error all kinds of different things. There are two ways to go about this trick. My personal favorite is to get myself to the bookstore and physically start walking around and looking at things on shelves, picking books up, reading the backs of them, grabbing a handful, an armful even, taking them to a quiet area in the store and just start reading a few pages of each and every book. This has gotten me out of so many reading slumps. It was almost hard to narrow down books to talk about in this video because I have done this so many times. Another way you can do this is by either using your e-reader or your audiobook subscription. So I guess technically I said there's two ways, but there's kind of three ways to do this. And doing the same thing, but either with your Kindle or by listening to a few chapters of an audiobook. Most of the time on e-readers, you can download samples of books, which I have done time and time again. I find it a really good way to kind of, again, just see if it's something that is going to pique my interest by the first few pages or the first few chapters. And you can honestly do the same with an audiobook. Maybe reading physically isn't what you need right now, but listening to someone and listening to someone's voice that actually clicks with you could help you get through that slump. But going back to my absolute favorite way to do this by going to the bookstore, and the books that I have actually discovered by just walking around and picking them up, and one of my favorites and one that I will probably never stop talking about, Crescent City by Sarah J. Maas. And the very first Sarah J. Maas I ever read, which I know is just completely backwards, but I was in such a bad slump. I hadn't read in months. It might have actually been up to a year at this point in time. And I was walking through Barnes & Noble. I was like, I know I want to read. I just don't know what I want to read. And I saw this and I was like, how stunning is that book? I want to see what that book is about. And I was like, sold, taking it home with me today. And so ensued a reignition of the passion that I knew I had for reading deep down. Like, not to be dramatic, this is going to sound dramatic, it just sparked something in me. And then it opened me to an entire world of books from an author that I hadn't even known about at the time. But that wasn't the only book that I've done that with. In fact, I've done it so many times that, as I said, I had a hard time kind of picking books to just narrow down and talk about in this video. But another one that I did that with was Out of Love by Hazel Hayes, and she very quickly became a favorite author of mine. And I did that by simply walking by a table. Like, I remember it vividly. This was on the front table at Barnes & Noble as a new release, and I was like, oh, I kind of like that cover. And I picked it up and I read the back and I was like, oh my gosh, this is a love story in reverse. This is about a couple that at the beginning of the book is broken up, and then you kind of follow their story backwards to see where they started to see how it ended, if that makes sense. But I was just absolutely blown away. And this was a book I hadn't even seen online. So it was just happenstance that I saw it on the table, had the urge to pick it up and read it. And it was a story that just took my breath away. And I loved her writing so much. This also happened with Slewfoot by Brom, because look at this book, look at this cover. Look at the size of this book. I don't know what it is. Why do we not have square books? I feel like every time I talk about this on camera, I'm like, where are all the square books at? It was just so visually appealing that I couldn't help but pick it up. And it was right at the perfect time because we were going into spooky season that year. I picked it up and saw it simply say, A Tale of Bewitchery on the front. And not to mention the absolutely stunning illustrations that came in this book. This is also one of the best books I have ever read. It is like in my top list of books. It's all because I was walking through the bookstore and I had the urge to pick it up. Well, there you have it, my friends. Those are all of my tips and tricks for helping you get through a reading slump, and ideas for different reading slumps because they are all different when they happen. Just to reiterate, these are all subjective, but they are things that have personally helped me in the past and also currently as I have been struggling the last 2 months or so. My main goal for this video was to just leave you with some ideas that you could try yourself next time you feel a slump coming on. So I'm not saying that one of these will work for you over the other, but I wanted to give you multiple ideas because every situation is different, and if one of them isn't working, try something else on the list. With that being said, I would love to know if you have any good ideas for getting through reading slumps. Leave that in a comment down below because I'm always looking for another way to fight that battle when it appears. I would also like to thank Wicks one more time for partnering with me on today's video, and don't forget that you can use my code Lori10 with that website linked down below. As always, if you liked this video, go ahead and hit that thumbs up button because it always helps a girl out. And if you want to make sure you don't miss any of my other upcoming videos, go ahead and hit that subscribe button too. And of course, it has been an absolute blast, and I can't wait to see you guys in the next one.